should we get stuck in? I have a couple of questions to ask you, if that's okay, and we'll see where it takes us. But I'm sure there's lots that you've got to share as well. So I guess I wanted to start by talking a little bit about kind of gratitude and appreciation. I think sometimes it can feel like quite a fluffy topic, but actually, I do hear from a lot of staff that we talk to as a charity that actually feeling valued and appreciated, not just from parents and students, but pupils, also from colleagues, from managers, from leaders. That's a theme that comes through really strongly. Is that something that's kind of echoed in your experience, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the most human thing, isn't it, to that need of that sense of belonging, to feel seen and to have heard and to feel valued and to feel like you're positively contributing to the group. And no matter what your beliefs are, going back in the minimum amount, thousands of years, we have always worked together. And I think even if you're a bit introverted like myself, you still thrive when you're around people. And yeah, we might have a bit of a smaller social battery sometimes, but actually that human connection, that sense of belonging, of contribution as well. We know the research is absolute that contribution is fundamental to our well-being. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly it, is it? The connection and the sense of belonging. I'm just wondering, Charlie, is there any kind of any really simple ways that you've seen staff showing gratitude to each other in school settings that's really resonated and that you think actually really genuinely does make a difference to staff well-being?
I think that word genuine is really important here, because like you say, sometimes gratitude can feel a bit like a wishy-washy thing. I think, we might talk about it later, but there's some credit to, having almost, a bit of a strategy around it, or some reminders to check in with certain people and things like that. We're not going to systemize this, but there is some merit to having some sort of approach in your mind. But I think the thing that has to happen is this has to be genuine. We have to have these genuine. Personally, I always see that face-to-face interactions work really, really well. One thing that we often see in school is the kind of the you've been mugged, and you get a mug on your desk with the chocolates and stuff, which is lovely. Like, all this stuff is really, really lovely. And, no one gets that. And, well, very rarely do people get that on their desk and go, oh, it's made me feel worse. But, I think sometimes having just that off the cuff, not planned, genuine, just drop in that comment in the corridor, that genuine thank you, I think it goes so far. I know personally that it gives me that warm, fuzzy feeling, when someone just pops by and just says a genuine gratitude. And I worked with a member of SLT once, and they would pop round on a Friday and just really genuinely, they pop around, they tried to get to everyone. It was a bit of a smaller school, about sort of 30 staff, but they'd kind of tried to get round to everyone on a Friday. But for those along the way that they had something to genuinely be grateful for, they would make sure that they shared that with that person, whether it was coming from them or from, they overheard some positive gossip, as we like to call it, and they're passing that on back to that person. I think just that genuine face-to-face connection goes a long way.
I think that's spot on, and that's exactly the kind of what we hear from our discussions with schools as well, that authenticity, giving feedback, kind of when it's well deserved, and being really real about it. That's definitely something that we've heard. So thank you. I think that's a really important point, actually. I'm also wondering, we talk a lot about cultures of care, or maybe the term psychological safety might come up in your school, but what does that really mean day to day? Like, what does that actually look like in practice?
Yeah, culture of care is definitely thrown around a little bit, isn't it, nowadays? But I think, for good reason, definitely for good reason. I think you can feel a culture of care. I think if you go and you speak to staff, they'll openly tell you whether they do feel cared for. And this is where wellbeing is one of the areas where wellbeing can feel a little bit more abstract potentially. It sometimes is something we feel sometimes just by nature, just by almost definition here. But I do think it's staff feeling that psychological safety, where they do feel like they're able to make mistakes, where they do feel like they can try new things, where they feel like they're able to, use their strengths and use their passions and bring a bit more personality to their work. And they feel they're able to almost, again, it sounds a bit cheesy, but almost express themselves kind of in the way they want to through their teaching and do things in that way. And obviously we're erring on towards autonomy here, but, that's part of care, is, staff being able to do those things. I think as well, it being a culture, is something that, for it to be a culture, it has to be something that we're all doing. And I think we can, when we have these conversations around wellbeing, it can be a very slippery slope to pinning this all on head teachers or to pinning this all on SLT. And actually, we all have to, that or autonomy coin. One side is independence and the other side is responsibility. We all have to play our part in it, so to speak. We always say it takes a village, for the children. Same thing for us and our well-being. It really, really does. So I think it is that helping people to hold boundaries, checking in on colleagues, supporting each other, as and when you can. And I'm not sure how true this is, so don't fact check this, but I heard about something about the Spartan armies. And again, I don't know how true this is, but it's a good analogy anyway. How when they go into battle, they could lose their spear and they could lose their helmet and get a bit of a telling off. But if they lost their shield, that was a really, really serious consequence, because that's what they used to protect the person to the right and to the left of them. It might have also been Romans, it might not have been Spartans, but the concept is the same. I think it is that thing. I think in a culture of care, we can tell that exists because we're supporting each other when that person needs it, and then that is reciprocated back again. And it's not a tit for tat, it's not I helped you last Tuesday, you're going to help me, but it's just that you're operating on 25%. I'll give you a little bit of my battery, a little bit of my bandwidth, knowing full well that you'll have my back at some point. And then, we can get into the physical environment as well. If the physical environment is very clearly not cared for, that almost through emotional absorption kind of impacts how we feel. If we're seeing the physical world isn't cared for, we might not feel mentally and emotionally cared for. So that definitely comes into it too.
Yeah, thank you. I think you hinted around trust as well, which I think is really, really important, isn't it, in relationships? And I guess it probably leads kind of on to my next question, which is around what happens when maybe you're navigating a relationship with one colleague, or maybe it's multiple colleagues, where maybe you feel that trust isn't there, or perhaps you're having some kind of difficulty navigating that kind of workplace relationship. What would you say to people that are experiencing those sorts of difficulties? Is there kind of one initial step you'd encourage them to take?
This is a really, literally in the title, this is a difficult one. It is hard. I think that, courageous conversations, as they call them, definitely comes into this at some point. Are you a fan of Ted Lasso at all, the TV programme?
Yes, I think I've heard of this. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you seen the scene in the pub where he's playing darts? And he's telling a story about his dad and but he gives this Walt Whitman quote. I think it's Walt Whitman, and it's essentially be curious, not judgmental. And I think that's the first thing, when it comes to these difficult conversations and any conflict and things like that. Being curious, because we never know what the other person's going through, what they've experienced. We each see the world through our own very, very narrow lens based on so many different factors. And I think it's so important to understand that people around us don't have the same experience of the world as we do. I think that's so key. So first of all, starting off with curiosity, I think, curiosity, not criticism, I think is really important. And asking questions can obviously open up that kind of dialogue. And I think the other one as well is sort of almost assuming the best intention of people. If we go into a situation, we assume they're out to get me or they've done this on purpose. I worked with a colleague for a number of years, and I'd always say, we'd always arrive about the same time. I'd always say good morning, and I'd walk past her on a certain side of her body down the corridor because of the directions we were travelling in. I'd always say good morning, and she'd always blank me. It wasn't until about a year in I realised that she was deaf in one ear. So for this entire period of time, I was convinced that she was just ignoring me. She wanted to speak to me or anything like that. But actually, she didn't hear me. We're having a bit of an internet lag here, but I think I got that. I think I heard your question. So in terms of bringing someone else in, I think once, if you have opened up that dialogue, you've been curious, not critical. You've assumed the best intentions. You've tried to have that private one-to-one conversation with them in an environment that is neutral and that is safe as much as it's possible in school. And still, maybe you've done that a couple of times and still there is no change in the situation or in the behaviour or anything like that. I think then it is a good idea to look at what the next steps would be. I think at that point, I think what we can sometimes do in these situations is we can slide a little closer towards sort of gossiping. And in our attempt to seek out support of what to do, sometimes these situations can lean towards gossiping a bit more. Whereas if we go into it with I want what's best for us, I want a resolution to it. And I can't remember, I'm literally writing about this for my second book right now, and I can't remember who said it, but there's a phrase of repair after rupture. I can't remember who said it. I want to say it's Gottman. I can't remember though. But this idea of we're always going to have conflict. We're always going to have conversations and constructive conversations, let's call them. And we're going to have disagreements because we do all see the world differently. And that's just part of the human experience. And sometimes ruptures to relationships will occur, but it's about how we deal with that and how we actually go about repairing it. If anyone feels isolated or victimized or targeted or anything like that, that's obviously not going to support that repair after rupture. So I think sometimes there will be that rupture to the relationship, but like I say, it's about how we go about repairing it, essentially.
And taking care of ourselves when that's happened as well. And I guess what I was getting at with the third person, when to bring them in, is the idea that you don't need to carry everything alone. You can talk to other people in a gossipy way, but perhaps as a trusted manager or colleague that you don't even have to name that person. But I guess it's the idea of not carrying things alone and not feeling like you have to manage everything and work everything out yourself. I think especially you do hear from teachers and education staff that actually there's a lot of being that person that people look to, especially if you're a leader, being that person that people look to for guidance and support, needing to be the knower all the time. It's quite a responsibility, and actually sometimes, whether it's a challenging relationship or another challenge, sometimes it is okay to reach out for that help, and I guess be a bit vulnerable, which can feel difficult sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm not a huge fan of that idea of teachers as superheroes and that kind of narrative, because we're not, we're human beings. But I think to talk about superpowers, vulnerability is a huge superpower, isn't it? Like, it is a huge strength. This is a conversation I often have with leaders as well. Is if you don't have to tear open old wounds or bare your soul to your colleagues if you're not comfortable to. But a little bit of vulnerability just shows that you're a human being. I think that goes a huge, huge way. And I think that, when we're talking about conflicts and things like that, both sides of the party, both parties, showing that bit of vulnerability, showing that bit of, being a human on this as well. I think it's really important that we focus, let's say there's been an incident, right? And one colleague has done something, and the other person has been affected by it. I think it's important to focus on the impact. So this has happened and this is how it has affected me. This is how it has made me feel. Not you have done this, you have done that, you're like this. Not internalizing it, externalizing it onto the other person, reflecting it onto them and making it their identity, because obviously we're all going to feel attacked at that point. But talking about the facts and the events that have passed and how it's affected you, the impacts, not insult, I think is a good point as well.
That's really great advice. And I think it's just worth bearing in mind, isn't it, that working in this high pressured environment in these schools and education settings, we know there's a lot of pressure. Sometimes we're all human and we don't always act perfectly, trying to give each other grace. And I think that's great advice. Talking I rather than the you can actually be really powerful, and go some way to help repairing if there has been some kind of conflict. So I think that's brilliant advice. Thank you, Charlie. I think there's definitely something around as well, boundaries, that comes up a lot, that we hear this a lot, a big topic in schools, and not just around workload, but actually also in the context of relationships as well with our colleagues. Is there anything that you kind of have found that has been particularly helpful in terms of a strategy to help education staff at any time of their career kind of instill more kind of healthy boundaries?
This is actually something that was said to me not so long ago, actually. Let's say there's an area of your work where you feel it's really taken over, and I'll have a complete lack of boundary here. Let's say someone in your team is throwing a message into the group WhatsApp at 10 o'clock at night, and you're there trying to get your 7 hours sleep, and your phone's going off and stuff. Just as an example, to almost project that lack of boundary, project that issue 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year into the future, and be like, if a boundary doesn't go in place, how is this going to affect me? And also asking that question of how is it going to affect the people around me? Because as we know, putting boundaries in place is self first, not selfish. We have to fill up our own cup, as the saying goes. But actually, we sometimes feel it easier to think about the impact on loved ones, for example, first, before we then come back to the impact on us. So sometimes looking ahead and thinking, okay, if that boundary doesn't get put in place, what's the impact on other people a year down the line? Obviously, we want to try and bring that almost visualization, I guess. We want to almost bring that back to ourselves and be like, okay, what's the impact on me as well? But sometimes, framing it around other people can be helpful. Definitely. Yeah.
Is there anything in your work, Charlie, I'm wondering, that you've seen where someone has kind of found it difficult to instill a boundary and then they've overcome that and they have? I'm just wondering if you've got any kind of practical ways that people might go about doing that if it's something they are struggling to do in their setting.
Yeah. I think one thing we can sometimes have as a misconception around boundaries is that they are fixed, and that we set this boundary. It's almost like a castle wall. I'm a bit of a history geek. I love castles, so I always imagine it like a castle wall, right? And it's this medieval castle wall somewhere in France, probably, and it's huge. You can't move it, and you set it, and that's it. You're done. And as soon as someone oversteps it, we break down the castle wall. We think, what's the point? No one's going to kind of respect this boundary. We benefit when we think of our boundaries as almost a little bit flexible. So every boundary has a buffer, as I like to call it. It's got a little bit of give and take, because there absolutely will be times where you'll need to flex a boundary. And if it is immovable, it's just going to break, and it's going to shatter, and you're going to feel really disheartened. So having almost, having an ABC plan, I call it, this is my A plan. This is where the boundary would be. It'd be great. But plan B is this. And, plan C, when there's a real challenge, is this. Giving yourself that boundary buffer can be really, really useful. I think as well, appreciating that this is a really uncomfortable thing, I think, to appreciate, but to understand that we teach people how to treat us. And like anything, it takes time. And I think this is something I'm really coming up against recently, is how with well-being, so many of these things don't come with instant gratification, like, other things in school might do. So, we can buy a new scheme of work in, or we can provide said CPD for staff, or we can measure this thing through this assessment process, and we get data and we get numbers and we get charts. Well-being, we can definitely do that a little bit, but actually, like you said at the start, well-being is just by nature a little bit more abstract. And I think to appreciate that is really, really important. Can't quite remember where I was going with that point. Sorry. What were we talking about? Boundaries?
No, I mean, they're all really, really valid points, Charlie, and I think it's one of those really difficult, I think, like you said, a lot of it, you don't always see the benefits at first. It's something I think that takes practice as well. Is that something that you would say? It's something that we might have to kind of practice, and maybe if we've not used to putting a boundary in place in the work we do, it might feel a bit uncomfortable at first. And that can kind of, but is there anything you'd say around maybe someone that's getting used to putting a boundary in that they haven't done before and it feels a bit uncomfortable? Is there any advice you'd kind of give them for kind of managing that kind of the emotional experience of that, perhaps?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as the funny thing about a lot of these topics around well-being is that we practice a lot of the principles every single day as teachers. So we know, whether we call it or not, we know about neuroplasticity and rewiring the brain, and little changes over time, can change the connections, and how we build habits, etc. And we talk about interleaved learning and starting small and repeated practice. And we do a lot of this with the children and young people we teach. We can apply this to boundaries, like literally copy and paste it into boundaries. So starting really, really small with my one-to-one clients particularly, I talk a lot about small steps and regular reps. If you go into the gym, you haven't been to the gym in 10 years, you buy yourself a membership. If you went and worked out for 24 hours, I mean, terrible things would probably happen, but you're not going to get healthier, fitter, stronger by going to the gym for 24 hours. But if you go for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and you build that up over time, and you have those small steps and regular reps, just like you're trying to build up your biceps, right? You slowly build it, you condition yourself to feel more confident. Confidence, essentially, in a nutshell, is feeling that you're able to do what you say you're going to do, and not feel judged for it, and to feel like it's being effective. That's a lot of confidence. You're building confidence in public speaking is doing more public speaking and seeing that, no one laughs and it goes quite well. And do you know what I mean? All these sorts of things. And we can apply all of this to building boundaries. So definitely that small steps, regular reps, breaking it down, appreciating that it will take time. And if someone oversteps a boundary, that doesn't automatically mean that you're doing anything wrong. There'll be feedback and people will overstep. We have that buffer, and then we can just go back, reassess. Is this still the right thing? Okay, let's try again. And I think, going right back to the beginning of our chat, talking about care, I think that applies here too. I think quite often with well-being, because we know the stakes are so high, right? Every year the well-being index comes out. We see how high the stakes are. We all know it. I think there's a lot of pressure internally and externally for leaders in particular, but for all of us. We've got to get well-being right. We have to get it right. And taking this back to that element of care, if we can just do something really, really small and we can practice it and we can see how staff respond and think and feel and take that feedback. And it's that feedback loop, isn't it? It's not a failure with these sorts of things. It's just taking it on board. It's just taking it as information, not as a judgment of your moral character almost, and going back and doing that. And just like with boundaries, with care as well, hearing what people have got to say. If you're going to set a boundary and it's with a particular person or a group of people, ask them about it. Get their voice, get their feedback. Just like with care, you can go and we have this incredible community in all of our schools of people who are literally chomping at the bit to tell us what they think, and they want to feel seen, they want to feel heard. Whether you are a head teacher or you are a year group leader, or even you're a class teacher and you've got 25 children, and no LSA, you're still a leader in some regard. Go and ask the people, ask the questions, and some of the feedback might be difficult, but whatever it is with well-being, ask the people who are wanting to share with you, because they will share.
I think that's brilliant advice, listening to the staff in your school and taking on board that every setting is unique. I think that's such an important point as well, that actually, what is it that matters to the staff in your school, especially when we're talking about things like appreciation and gratitude. Every staff member is going to be unique and different in what matters to them. So I think that listening to the team is really, really key, isn't it? And you did mention the Teacher Wellbeing Index. Thank you for mentioning that, because my final question was really going to be around, workplace relationships. Why is this so important? And actually, we know from our Teacher Wellbeing Index that 49% of staff say that their organisational culture negatively affects their mental health. So, that's 49%. And we know that 40% of staff also experience mental health issues, and they don't feel that, they're supported. 40% of staff feel that they're not supported with their mental health. So they're quite shocking figures. And actually, there's a lot that I think that can be done. Of course, there's many systemic issues. There's also a lot that we can do as colleagues to support each other. So I think these are really, really, really valid points. And I guess as we kind of come to the end of our discussion, I did wonder if there was any kind of key takeaway today from everything that we've spoken about, kind of one key takeaway or practical point that you'd like someone to take away from today's discussion, with regards to building those stronger relationships.
Yeah. Oh, there's so many. I think, am I allowed to have a few?
Of course you can.
I think,
allow it.
I think just appreciating how this is such a human thing. And I think when we are stressed and we are overwhelmed and we are bogged down and we're rushing from one thing to the next, and we are, likely sitting there with dysregulated nervous systems ourselves and our brains in a million places, and all those things are happening for us, no matter your role, it's so easy to forget that we are humans before we are anything else. We are people before we are professionals, and we have brains and hearts and central nervous systems and stress chemicals and hopes and dreams, and we want to feel seen and heard and valued, and all those amazing things that make being a human so awesome. I think we have that as individuals, but so does your business manager, so does your catering staff, so do the children, so does your site manager. Like everyone in our communities, we are, before anything, we are human beings. And just to go back to that point of, if we can just make the next person feel that bit more seen and heard and valued, like they matter, like they are seen here, they are part of the team, just in any way we can, I think that is magic. It really, really is magic. You know, we always say about it taking a village with the children, like I mentioned earlier. Same thing happens for us with our well-being. It does take everyone's input. I think that's really, really key. And then, you know, just something we said with the boundaries about starting small. We don't need to have this expectation of overhauling it. And I know that lots of people will be thinking about their school improvement plans, school development plans, and things like that, and we'll be setting these goals and taking things to governors and all the other bits and bobs. And I think it's very easy to set very, very lofty goals, particularly with well-being. I think we can get a little bit fixated on the end point, the metrics, you know, proving what we're doing. But if we just strip it all back, just go back to the tiniest little thing we can do. Has someone mentioned someone else doing something great in your school? Okay, brilliant. Whatever your role, can you go and congratulate them on that? Can you talk about not just what that person has done, but also, you know, their character? You know, oh, it was really, really lovely of you. It was really, really caring of you. You know, and you're a really caring asset to our team. When, you know, I saw you did that thing. Not just always praising what people have done and their output. Like, oh, great, you got 4 more children to be expected, you know, and praising the outcome of things. You know, if we go and we do think about people's, and that was something actually I was going to say, sorry, I forgot, talking about care and gratitude, making it super, super specific as well, you know, with these things. So whether it is something you're going to do for communication, whether it's something you're going to do to reduce workload, or whether it's, you know, paying gratitude to someone, make it super specific and make it really, really clear. When talking about gratitude again, just for a second, we actually see that sometimes if we pay very disingenuous compliments to people, we actually see it kind of go the other way, and it actually kind of erode trust, and it can make us feel more disconnected, you know. So yeah, I think that's a few things. Starting really, really small, remembering that we are all, no matter our roles, we're people before we're professionals. I think that is key.
I think that's absolutely sound advice, Charlie. Thank you so much for everything you've said today. I'm sure there's so many people watching that are going to find it incredibly, incredibly helpful. So yeah, can't thank you enough for talking to us today.